Sunday is the gospel reading is from the 12th chapter of Luke, and it is about the person who came up and asked him to mediate his inheritance complaint. Probably he was the younger son of an older one, but we don't know. And Jesus uses it to talk about how we're not supposed to build up possessions in this life, that's really not what it's about. And of course he tells this little story about the fellow who does well, prospers, and then he dies before he really gets to enjoy his leisure as he had hoped. Well, it got me to thinking about my own life and my own ministry in particular. When I was rector of St. John's in Mankato, I spent several years looking for a job, hoping to go to a larger congregation. And eventually I did. I went to Fayetteville, Arkansas. And that was a great congregation, St. Paul's. They were town and gown. They had been nicely integrated. It was University of Arkansas there in Fayetteville, and it was a fine parish with a lot of resources, about 600 people or so. It had terrible stewardship when I arrived. Terrible only because for a long time it had been carried on by the wealthy of the parish, and they stopped at some time in the past, and something else had to happen. So part of what I did was to make something else happen, which was to sort of lay it on the backs of the vestry, and they rose to the occasion. But we were 600 with grossly underfunded parish at about $170,000. I think now it's well over 800,000 or more. I'm not sure. They have a number of employees, a lot more than we had. Anyway, it was a good bit of work that I did there, but there were a couple things that were didn't quite work, at least not in my favor. One of them was, it's a southern parish, and Southerners have a little bit different idea about authority. As a rector, I felt like I was up on a pedestal, and I was sort of wrapped in cotton, and my life didn't feel real to me. That's a very dangerous place to be. At the time, my marriage was not in very good shape. We had worked hard at it, actually, but we were stuck. And obviously, at some point, we had a divorce. And I resigned. Not fair to them, and there were other extenuating things that made it better to resign. Anyway, from there, I really didn't have a job. It takes a while to get a job, and I needed to decompress. Bishop Mays was very good to me, and he sent me off for evaluation, and it was determined that there was nothing wrong with me as a minister, that I needed the break, and so I had the break for about a year and a half, and then Bishop Mays assigned me to Blytheville and Osceola, two small parishes in the northeastern part of Arkansas, and fine people. I enjoyed my time with them. Can't say that I did anything particularly important for them in terms of changing their situation, but from there, I went to Utah. Now, the thing is, divorced rector, not a good job prospects are much lower, which is okay. But I went to Utah. I went to Brigham City, a nice little town at the north end of the Salt Lake, and enjoyed our time there. However, I got crosswise with the senior warden. He was an Air Force colonel, and I was an Army lieutenant in our pasts, and we'd both been to Vietnam, and so and we had different take on it. My take came out of Tolstoy's War and Peace, and his came out of the idea that the civilians screwed the war effort. Well, I can see why he felt that way. Later on, I found out that the Air Force had been put in a terrible situation where they couldn't pick their targets, and they were not able to carry on their strategy, which is first to get rid of anti-aircraft weapons and then to bomb. But it was run by the civilians, and it was run badly by the civilians. So I understand where he was coming from, but he got me fired, and so there I was, without a job, and my blessed friend, who was up in Logan, Utah, was having some issues with cancer chemotherapy. So I went up there to help out for about a year. And in the meantime, I did find a job, and that job was at Sault Ste. Marie in Michigan. Now, what I want to say about this is that, first of all, one has expectations, one has fantasies about where one is going in the future, and where I was nowhere where I'd ever expected to be, which turned out to be fine. But at the time, it took a little just relaxing and submitting and allowing it to be what it was. At Sault Ste. Marie, the Upper Peninsula, the diocese up there of northern Michigan, is very much into what we call mutual ministry, whereas you raise up a group of lay people, you ordain and you teach them, and then you ordain and certify them to be the replacement for a rector. Each person kind of takes a little piece of the rector's job, and we had 3 priests, a couple deacons, and a number of people who were certified in Christian education and pastoral care. I think all of those people are still in ministry there. We had a good time, but it took about a year to go through the training process, and then 5 of them were ordained, 2 to the diaconate and 3 to the priesthood. One of the priests decided it wasn't for her. The others are still going, as far as I know. Anyway, they're probably retired. At least one of them is. But I really felt good about that ministry. It was, but I could see, as I was reading the tea leaves, that there wasn't going to be enough money to have 2 full-time clergy in the eastern part of the Upper Peninsula. And so I began to look for a job. The other person was a missioner who had 5 or 6 parishes, and I thought was doing a fine job. So I looked for a job and got one in Wyoming, Buffalo, wonderful little town of 4,000 people. The problem is, and I didn't really know it, and it was never really told to me, as these things aren't, that my predecessor, not the immediate predecessor had been there only a year and went somewhere else. But the real predecessor, the one before, had been there a number of years, and he had slept around in the parish and in the town. So everybody knew in the town of 4,000. And the parish was abused, had been abused by this guy. And so they didn't trust clergy. And so I was the one who was there to rebuild their trust, if I could. Now, there were several problems. One is I'm kind of an urban person, and they were obviously rural. And they assumed that I was a liberal and they were conservative, and all those assumptions worked kind of against me. But it was also part of the trust issue. These people had trusted before. They'd had some good clergy in the past. But anyway, I was there for a little over 3 years, and I actually retired out of there. I had hoped to be there another couple of years, but it was clear to me by the end of it that we weren't in very good shape. I remember one of the things I had enjoyed, sort of kicked up my heels and enjoyed it. I did a 6-week series of sermons in July and August when nobody's usually there, and it was on a book about what we understand in evolutionary psychology, what's happened to understanding of the brain. The amazing thing was, week after week, the gospel for that Sunday fit just almost hand in glove with the material that I was studying and then presenting to them. It was fun. I enjoyed it. They hated it. They absolutely hated it. And so in September, we sat down and had a parish meeting, and I mostly listened. And they got to complain about what they didn't like, and I got to listen. And I did listen, and I reflected back to them pretty much and I agreed to what they wanted me to do, which I began to do in earnest from then on. Then lo and behold, in March or so, or February, the grumbling started rising up again. So I decided it was time for me to go, and so I retired, which I was lucky to be able to do. Now, what I'd like to say about all of that is that I had no picture in my head of what the future was going to bring. But in at least 3 of those congregations, I did pretty good work, pretty good ministry. In Buffalo, the person who followed me is still there. So if trust was an issue, it is no longer. I think I had a little something to do with that. I hope I did. Anyway, I enjoyed the people, and they, as I say, I didn't take most of it personally. I had been doing ministry, ordained ministry, for more than 25 years at that point, so I didn't take these things personally, even though I did at times feel a little bit like Saint Sebastian, with the arrows coming in. But I can't blame them. They had been abused, and they had every right to be picky, I think. But my point here is, and this is the point that I'd like to make from the gospel, Jesus he had set his face on going to Jerusalem. He knew what was going to happen there, or he surmised what was going to happen there, and he was going to be killed, and in 3 days raised again. But he was still going to have to go through the agonal part of dying. And so when this person comes up and asks him to arbitrate his inheritance, probably a younger son trying to get an older son to do something, it was outside his wheelhouse at the time. He was looking to Jerusalem, and his mission was preeminent. And so he knew what he was doing, and he went and did it. I, on the other hand, did not know what I was doing. Particularly, I'd looked for a larger congregation, and then I'd gone to Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I enjoyed most of my 5 years there as my marriage disintegrated. I didn't enjoy that part of it, but I didn't have much of a future. I will thank Bishop Mays for giving me what future I had, and I'm grateful that the church found it possible to continue to use me in ministry. At least 3 of those small situations, I felt like real ministry happened, even though it wasn't appreciated necessarily, and that's appreciation doesn't have much to do with it. As I say, it's not really personal. It has to do with, differences and how we deal with them and who's got the power. And in a small congregation, the congregation has the power. The clergy person is a chaplain to the family, and the family has pretty much in charge of itself. But I had 3 ministries of which I can be proud, I think, not in a sinful sense, but in a good and faithful servant sense. And I kept moving forward, even though I didn't know what forward meant exactly. Not like Jesus, I didn't have my face clearly focused on the mission, but I did have myself focused on doing ministry, whatever ministry called forth from me, and doing it in a kind of detached way that allowed me to be more effective than I would have been otherwise. Well, Jesus doesn't want us to be focused on possessions, but I actually think, for me at least, the importance of this was his focus on his mission, his willingness to go forward with his mission, which he at that point realized was not positive in the sense of him going on to greater glory. He was going on to suffering. Now, there was, on my part, some suffering involved, but it was mostly stuff that was deserved by the ordained people who had preceded me, but since I was the one there, that I was the one who was going to get it. Anyway, have a good week.